Hi everyone, it's me again. Oh, that's recording. Yeah, this is the macroeconomics homework one. It's technically term two, homework one, but it's homework one. Uh, right. I'm just going to go over this stuff. As you can maybe see in the bottom right, it is nearly midnight, and I kind of do want to go to bed because I've got work to do tomorrow as well. So I'm going to go over this fairly quickly. All right. Now, fundamentally, this isn't too bad, actually, if you sort of look at things. Word length, obviously, that's up to you. But this on itself is too bad. Isn't too bad. Okay, let's just go ahead and start. So part A. Decide on a supply-side reform, find an example of a specific supply-side reform that has been implemented in a country that has a flexible exchange rate. Use the data query, and then it tells you how to do this. Right. I'll show you how to do this. First of all, we've got to find a country that has a sort of floating exchange rate. Now, I'm going to open these here, and I'm going to expand this. So here's the sort of data reader online. Now, you can select as many years as you want. I just sort of selected maybe the last three. Actually, I selected just 2020. So you can do whatever you want with this. Countries, you can select all the countries, or you can select a certain amount. So you can select by region, you can select by the type of market, you can select by miscellaneous groups. For this purpose, I'm going to select by advanced economies. And for categories, I'm just going to click exchange agreement, just so I keep it very easy. Okay, there it is. And I'm going to generate a content report. And here's the content report. Now, it's going to be in pages like this, and you want to look for free floating here. Okay, the free floating should have something in it if you want to have that. So here we've got Andorra, and it doesn't seem, so the euro is legal tender here, but it doesn't have its own monetary policy. So it's a bit of a tricky one, Andorra. Maybe Andorra is not the best one for us to observe. Let's try another. We have Australia. Okay, let's see. Does Australia have a free floating? It does. So we see that the free floating bit here is filled in. So we're classifying both the de jure and de facto exchange rate agreements as free floating. So Australia can be a good example for us. So let's say we're using Australia. Okay? So, using Australia, we've decided on Australia here. Let's go back to what we saw. Oh dear, give me a sec. Yeah, let's go back to the homework. Now we've got Australia. Now let's go for this place to find some supply-side reforms. Don't know why I said it like that. So this is the OECD iLibrary. Okay, this has plenty of reforms for different places. Okay, so now what I'm going to do. Okay, so we were talking about 2020. Stuff like that. The 2021 one should be fine. So all we really need to do is to download the PDF. Ah, right. I need to subscribe. Give me a second. Okay, we're back. I have the economic policy reforms here. Okay. All you have to do is really sign in and then just search economic policy reforms 2021. Should come up with this. Just press PDF and you've got the PDF. Right. Let's put in Australia. Yeah, so that's on page 74. So where is Australia? That's Austria. Was that Austria or was that Australia? I'm trying to find... Oh wait, no, Alright, here's Australia. Okay, so the page should look like this. If I turn off my dark mode, it'll look like that. Oh god, it's so bright. How horrible. So this is what it should look like for you. Okay. Now, what you want to do is you want to ignore all this extra detail. It's a lot of detail. You don't really need it. And I want to go for the summary of the reforms and the recommendations. Now, remember, we're going for a supply-side reform. So we need to look at sort of categories that are about supply-side stuff. So competition and regulation could be a good idea. Okay. So how does competition and regulation reform affect things? Education and skills could also affect productivity. So again, that's up to you to decide on that. And there's a lot of different ones here. So environmental policy, that's less relevant. A tax system is not really relevant, and inclusiveness is not necessarily relevant either. So you may want to focus on these two. So for example, if I was doing it for Austria, I would look at competition and regulation. And let's say, for example, make liquidation for small businesses less costly and more debtor-friendly. So I just think about, okay, what's going to happen with that? Is the WS going up or down? Is PS going up or down? or perhaps automatically regularizing occupational licenses, or the government reserve medium-term funding to create strategic fund, helps universities analyze their innovative reform projects. Again, this is kind of complicated, so there's stuff going on with this, okay? Now I'll show you what I did, okay? The Netherlands. There it is. Okay, I think this is the Netherlands part. No, it isn't. Just Netherlands. Where is it? There it is. Okay, Netherlands. So I picked the Netherlands, and Netherlands, okay, you're going to get different categories for each country, so this one has 2 labour market ones, so I use these. And specifically, the Netherlands had a Balanced Labour Market Act that entered into enforcement in January 2020. So what I did is I did a little bit of research about that. Now, let me show you guys what I sort of found. We have summaries of the actual policy, okay, telling me what it did. Okay, so for example, this webpage takes me through exactly what the policy is doing. It's from HLB Nederland, so it's all good. It's sort of taking account of what's happening. And because I also wanted something a bit more official, I also found the International Labour Organization site, and this is the official legislation. Okay, if you want to find official legislation, try the International Labour Organization. Okay, so I have my research now. Here, what it's asking you to do is that in 2 paragraphs write a concise statement of the reform, stating the country, time period, and nature of the reform. When selecting the reform, remember you need to be able to model it using the WSPS model. Okay, this is what I said. In 1 paragraph, explain the motivation for the reform. Now, in this one, it specifically says, and I can quote the abstract here, this reform reduces the gap between permanent contracts and flexible employment to encourage employers to hire workers on a permanent basis. That is the intention of the reform. It's very clearly laid out. It's very clearly made like what's going to happen. And I can even go more into detail with what it says about what's happening. You preferably want something like that. Okay? This is just what I've used. You can use whatever else you want as long as it's a flexible exchange rate economy and you've got a good policy there. Okay. That's going to be sort of what the deal is. Now, what does it say next? For question B. Using the simulator, start by opening the simulator. Okay, so basically it wants us to model things in the simulator. Where is the simulator? Here it is. Did that show up? Good. Now, everyone, this simulator might not work depending on if you're on Mac or stuff. I think Suraj put a link in the chat. I'm going to copy that and put that in the description. That is for Mac users. Who's having a bit of trouble. But for Windows users, like me, I can show you what I've done. So ignore my weird file organization. So you see here, I've got my stuff, and I've got the Carlin. I don't really know how to say that name, but I'm just going to, it's a name. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on the file, okay, and you should see this menu, and I'm going to click Properties right at the bottom there, okay. Now this isn't the case, but it should have a button right here that says Trust the file, okay? This is because normally macros are used to sort of run code on your computer, and often, you know, Windows doesn't like importing macros because obviously if a random file can run code on your computer, it can mess some stuff up. So you just have to trust the file in the properties and then it should be good. If that doesn't work, try using the online version. Okay, that's in the description. Okay, so here is a shock model. Okay, now, depending on what you're going to be doing, you're either going to experience a positive supply shock or a negative supply shock. Okay, now, it really is up to you. In my case, because we are sort of thinking about workers having basically a safer time because they're having more permanent deployment, WS is shifting up. Okay, WS will be shifting up in this case, which means we're reducing equilibrium unemployment, which means we're experiencing a negative supply shock. Okay, now I'm going to do this twice. Actually, tell you what, I will start by doing a positive one and showing you guys the results. Here's a positive supply shock. I'm going to press inflation figures. You should get something that looks like this. Okay. Then for public finance figures, it looks like this. And for exchange rate figures, it looks like this. Oh, sorry, that's my go to sleep alarm. Ignore that. Okay, now for negative, which is the one I did, it should look like this. Here's the negative one. Here's the negative one. Here's the negative one. These are the results that you should be getting for a negative supply shock. Now, I'm going to explain this. Yeah, use the impulse response functions to, or from the simulator, or from your sketches, to explain the path of the economy following the above shock. So let's see, what does this actually say? First of all, let's start with inflation. So we're seeing that in period 5, we're going to have an immediately high inflation shock. That's fair. If we're having less supply, of course, we're going to have a lot of inflation. But it's going to gradually slope out, okay? We know this is the gradual adjustment mechanism we've seen before. We also see interest rates obviously start at R star, and they get back to R star eventually. The nominal one obviously peaks a lot more because it's going within, it's not really, well, it's just, to be honest, I do need to understand why the nominal is peaking a bit more. I'm not too sure. GDP declines, obviously, because we're not producing as much, and then sort of levels out at a lower level because it's a permanent shock, remember? And economic growth sort of has this big old spike, goes back up when we're sort of getting back on the horse, I suppose, and then levels out. Okay, public finance. This really isn't that relevant. I don't think this comes up, so you can sort of ignore this. But let's bring in the exchange rate. Okay, so if we zoom in, okay, on real exchange rate figures. All right, here's the real exchange rate. Okay, we start and we experience an immediate appreciation. Okay, after which it sort of goes back up and levels out at a new equilibrium. This little dip here at the start is the overshoot. Okay, we've overshot, and so we adjust back to the new equilibrium. The same thing happens with nominal as well, in a bit more of a dramatic fashion, I think. Or maybe it's exactly the same, I'm not too sure. But that is sort of what you need to know when it comes to the simulator, okay? So we're going to see the real exchange rate dip and then level out at a new equilibrium, okay? We're going to see, hold on, I need to get back to like 100% magnification. Cool. And then we're going to see inflation rise, we're going to see the inflation rise and go back to the same point. We're going to see interest rates rise and go back to the same point. And yeah, and we're going to see output obviously decline over time. So, what the question asks next is draw out the model. Now, this is where this picture on the left comes in. Now, I drew this with white Posca marker on my window at 10 in the evening. So, I'm sorry if it's not clear, but I'm going to zoom in. Try to make it. There's me in my shit jumper. Here is the model. Okay, I hope this is in focus enough. Let me see. Is that getting picked up on the recording? This looks big enough. Okay. So first of all, we're starting at A. Okay. Now, the crucial thing with supply shocks is that it is affecting the Eru curve. Okay. Aggregate demand shocks affect the aggregate demand curve. Aggregate supply affects the equilibrium rate of unemployment curve. Okay. Just because, okay, by the way, remember, this does not say include WSPS, so we don't have to include this here. We have the AD Eru, we have the ISRX, and we have the PCMR. Okay? Very cool. Now, if you sort of remember, there's often a positive shock before there is a negative. Okay? In fact, if we look at the data, this is backed up. If we look at the numerical results here, we're seeing something interesting. Right at the start, there is an output gap that is positive, a 4.2% output gap. This indicates that we're having a positive output at the start, which is kind of interesting. So this points towards us moving to the right instead of moving to the left right away. This is this point B, okay? B moves to the right along our star here to start it. This B should have an IS curve going through it, just so you guys know. It's just, yeah, it should have something going through it. But regardless, it's not. Just ignore that for now. B is also moving to the right here. It's on a new Eru curve. And B is moving up the PC curve in this model. Okay. Then we obviously have this dramatic shift over to C. Okay. So we have a dramatic shift over to C, which is on or rather away from the new Eru curve at Z, which is sort of what we're aiming for. C here is going to be above on the Rx curve, because remember we're talking about implementation here, and Rx is about implementation, so it's going to be on the Rx curve, intersecting with the new IS curve. And this is going to intersect with the new MR curve and the new PC curve, because the PC curve is from the previous level of inflation, because the previous level of inflation at B, we had some inflation, so we're getting a new PC curve, and the MR curve changes because we've had a change in expectations, essentially. So we're going to have a shift. So it gets to here. This is also C. So we've highly had this shift. Now, we're not at the equilibrium yet. We're not at Z. We need an eventual adjustment. Now, note here that C is in a bit of an odd spot. Now, this is also made quite clear to you. Remember what the CB sets the interest rate different from R star, and the economy will be off the AD curve. Okay? I have represented this here, and it's being glared at by a light. Okay? So the important thing is that C is, okay, this is a bit cut off, but you're going to have to trust me here. C, the R is above R star. We know this because we're seeing this in the ISRX diagram. You know, the level C is at, the real interest rate is above R star right now. Okay? So, because of that, we have to be above the AD curve, which necessarily represent R equal to R star. So if we're above R star, we're going to be above the AD curve. However, because C has to be overshooting, if you remember, we saw this overshoot here, this little dip. Because there has to be an overshoot, it has to be under the actual equilibrium. So C has to be between the AD curve and the equilibrium. And so it exists in this sort of weird triangle space over here. Okay? Now, this is a bit small, so it's hard to see, so that's why I sort of enlarged it. And we're going to have this eventual trend back. Okay, so C eventually goes back towards Z at the equilibrium. C eventually goes back towards Z here as the RX curves shift, remember? So the RX curves are going to shift all the way down so that way you're going to intersect Z. Okay? And then we're going to have declining PC curves here as the rate of inflation decreases. Okay? And everything comes back to the start. Okay? We've just changed the output. So we're back at pi t, and we're back at R star, but we now have a new real exchange rate, which is lower. So our exchange rate has appreciated. Nice work. And yeah, that is sort of how the policy works. Okay? Now, I'm not completely sure that this is right. I think I've got some of the basics right, but of course, remember, this is for a negative supply shock, okay? This would maybe be about the reverse if you were doing a positive supply shock. So you may want to sort of check on your own working with that, stuff like that. I don't know. I'm just saying that this is my version of the negative supply shock. So take it with that what you will. Okay? Now, we're done with this. Now we just need to go on the last question, question E. In light of the specific reform you've chosen, briefly discuss one aspect of modelling the adjustment of the economy to a supply-side reform that seems for you to be unrealistic. Express your concerns in terms of the assumptions of the model. Now, we need to talk about the assumptions of our model and why that might not realistically affect how the real world changes. Well, the fact is that we do have exogenous assumptions, exogenous events that sort of take place in the middle of this adjustment period. To us, this adjustment period is just a slow thing that just happens, and then eventually we get to the equilibrium. But in the real world, things interrupt that adjustment period. It's a long adjustment period. If we look at our model and we look at all the inflation stuff, inflation takes a while to actually level out. What if another shock hits in period 7? What if it hits in period 8? You know? Something will interrupt. And this is relevant to my policy, actually. So because my policy was brought into effect in January 2020, it was just months before the COVID pandemic, and there really wasn't time for the economy to adjust from this C all the way to Z. Something had to happen midway. And often in our models, we make the assumption that nothing is really happening midway. Okay? But in the real world, events interrupt us. So we have to maybe try to think about that is a part of our model that is not a realistic assumption. Okay? Another idea could be the idea of a stable equilibrium. Very rarely do we ever see stable values in economies. Okay, we don't see an economy staying at a specific value for very long. And the idea that we have this very specific new equilibrium interest rate, not interest rate, this new equilibrium exchange rate is quite unrealistic because, of course, we can think about its behavior. We can think that, on general, it's going to appreciate, sure. But we can't really pin down a value. This Q bar prime doesn't really have a value at all, okay? It's a representation, okay? So there's no real precise way of getting an equilibrium, is sort of the reason why this assumption doesn't really work. Okay, that is it. Obviously, you might want to research your policy a little bit more. You might want to come up with something yourself. And of course, if you have a positive supply shock, I can't really help you. Hopefully this can act as a guide, but I can't really help you. Okay, I think that's literally it. Okay, I hope that you guys found that helpful. I tried to be as quick as I could. I think it was about, 20 minutes? Yeah, just about 20 minutes. Okay, well, I think that's it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to message me or drop a comment or whatever. But yeah, I'll see you later. Bye.